Hi everyone, this is Grace and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to learn how to decorate this Mermaid Under the Sea set. So for this first cookie, we are going to do the sand dollar. For this, I am using a 2 consistency outline and flood for a very specific reason. You will see after I do this initial outline that we're then doing these little cutouts, and I find that it is absolutely crucial to use piping consistency to outline first and then flood. For the most seamless look, you'll want to flood while the icing from the outline is still wet. So I'm going in right away with a flood consistency. I usually like to flood around the cutouts first, and then I flood the rest of the cookie. It just seems to make sense to me. I don't know. Somehow it will make it more seamless. Maybe, maybe not. But there is some logic to it that icing will start to crust the longer that it's sitting there with the piping consistency. So if I can get to it while it's still a little wet, it'll be nice and seamless. I'm then going to use a scribe just to help that last little bit settle. Give it a tiny bit of jiggle even though it didn't really need it. And there we go. I let that dry first, has a nice solid crust, and now I am piping the details. For this, I am using lettering consistency, which is like a soft peak warm toothpaste. I like to do this for detail work when I can because as you can see when I'm piping these dots, it doesn't leave a peak because it's soft enough that it will settle. So I'm going to also let that detail dry, and now I am painting with the Sugar Art Sterling Pearl line, and this is the mother of pearl color. You can barely see it, but it is a shiny, nice white. I'm using a relatively small brush here. You can see that I'm mixing the color on the side. I mix my dusts with Everclear always. You can either use Everclear or vodka. Some people use water. Yes, when you're using alcohol, it will all evaporate. And the Everclear I use is the 95% proof, I believe it's called, which means that it evaporates very quickly. And I often have to add Everclear to my dust as I'm working. And there you go. That's the sand dollar. Up next, we are going to do the Starfish. For the Starfish, I am doing a 1 consistency outline and flood. For this, it's just a more seamless look. There's no need to do a cutout. So here I am, first carefully outlining. This icing is specifically for a 2 consistency outline and flood. So it's a little on the thicker side. I find this very hypnotizing to watch. This is a good shape too to do a 2 consistency because the sections are a bit smaller. And it's a moderately sized cookie, which is also easier for 1 consistency outline and flood. You can see that it is just barely settling on its own. I'm leaving this here so you can see that it can settle, but then I feel I need to give it a little jiggle just to encourage it that last bit. So I will allow that to dry. And now I'm doing what I call the bear technique. So first I am piping some icing on the cookie, and then I'm taking a pretty fluffy brush and I'm just tapping lightly. The more icing that you put on the cookie, the more peaks and texture you're going to get. I wanted this to have quite a bit of texture, so this is kind of on the heavier end of how much icing you want to use, but if you're looking for just the tiniest bit of texture, definitely use less icing. I'm going around on the edges to make sure every little bit of the surface has the texture. I let that dry. And now I am piping the dots on top of the Starfish. Again, this is that soft peak lettering consistency, which is perfect for piping dots because they will settle on their own. Ain't got time to be using a scribe on every single dot, my friends. So do yourself a favor with your consistency here. I love this all white look. I could have just left it like this, but the whole point of this set was that I wanted to paint with the Sugar Art Sterling Pearl. So I let that dry, and now I'm using the Sugar Art Sterling Pearl in 2 different colors. This first color is Orange Zest. I'm using a somewhat fluffy bigger brush and just tapping. I'm holding the brush with my dominant hand and I'm tapping with my other hand. Some people will flick the actual bristles, which I think just makes a whole lot of mess, and I prefer to do this tapping method. I'm then switching my brush, and now I am moving over to Golden Halo. This is one of the gold colors that the Sugar Art has. And again, tap, tap, tapping. I'm using a smaller brush here because I'm then going to go in and paint the dots. But for tapping like this, the splatter method where I'm really trying to get a lot of coverage, I do wish that I had used a larger brush for this, but I didn't want to dirty 2 brushes, so I survived. And so can you. It's all about just working with what you've got. Sometimes you need to compromise. So I'm painting the dots here. Now, painting raised piping details can be very stressful. I'm moving very quickly because this cookie is just a messy cookie, and that's the point of it. So I am not doing a perfect job on these dots, but I'm doing good enough. If it bleeds down because I had too much liquid, it didn't matter because that's the look of this cookie, and I love it. Hope you do too. So up next we have the shell. For this, we are going to start by flooding in sections. Sometimes when I flood in sections, I will use 1 consistency to outline and flood, and sometimes I will use 2. For this, I decided to use 2 because these are relatively small and pretty precise sections. So I wanted to definitely do that pipe first to outline with a thicker piping consistency. This is that same piping I've used this whole time, so it's a soft peak lettering, and I'm just going through and outlining. You'll see at the end that I chose not to outline the little corners at the bottom. I'm going to go in next and immediately begin to flood the first sections. Flooding in sections means that you alternate which sections you're flooding so you can get that definition between them. If I just flooded all of these sections at one time, I would lose that definition. It would all just meld together, and there would have been absolutely no point in outlining all of those sections separately first. So a lot of people always ask, how long does it take to dry? I've honestly never timed it, how long I let it sit in between sections. I do it based on how it looks. So it needs to have built a crust. So by the look on it, it just doesn't look like it's wet anymore. It looks like it has started to dry. Now, if you're unsure, I have ruined many a cookie testing it out, putting my thumb on it, but you can put gentle pressure if you trust yourself enough, just to see if it has crusted. Now here I am. I have let those initial sections dry first, just dry enough. You're not looking to completely dry these sections, just to crust, so that when you go in, like I'm doing here, and piping those last sections, that you will get that definition. So I'm doing my best here to not have to use a scribe. I find that when you need to use a scribe when flooding in sections, you can easily lose the shape of the section by using a scribe. So I always try to just pipe the entire section with my bag. Now again, I just let those last sections dry so that I can go in and, oh, here I am poking an air bubble. I do get them every once in a while, happens to everyone. I've let those sections dry, again, crust just a little bit, and I'm going in and I'm piping these last little bits at the end. Now, I will admit, when I was doing this without the camera filming this other section. I turned my cookie so that I could more easily pipe it. It's a very awkward angle from where I'm piping right now, but for the sake of this video, I didn't want to move the cookie. In general though, I'm always supportive and a fan of move the cookie to the angle that is most comfortable to decorate for you. Now we are on to this added texture on top. I'm using that same piping consistency, and I'm just laying the groundwork for generally where I'm hoping to get this texture. After I'm done piping this, I'm going to take a fan brush that is a little bit wet. Since this icing is piping consistency, it does need a little bit of help to spread. And I'm just very roughly taking that fan brush and just flattening the piped sections out just to get that added texture that I was looking for. Add that little bit of texture at the bottom. This is just a very loose artistic look, so don't stress. This is the easy part. And again, this painting, pretty easy. So I'm using two colors here. This first color is Mermaid. Using a pretty small brush, and I'm just whisking away with just some brush here and there, no real science to it. And then I'm going to come in with the Pastel Blue, and again, brush, brush, nothing very precise, artistic. Add some here, add some there. To help tie in, I then decide to go and add some dots, as there were a lot of dots elements in other cookies in this set. So I am using the mother of pearl here in a pretty opaque usage, just to get a little bit of this whimsical dot effect on this cookie. Again, to just tie it all in with the design of this entire set. And that, my friends, is this shell cookie. Hope you enjoy making it. And last but not least, we have the mermaid tail. First here, I'm using an edible marker to just outline the major sections so that as I'm piping, I have a visual guide. I will be covering those sections with icing, so do not fret. This kind of dot work, I believe, is called pressure piping. And pressure piping just means that I am varying the pressure on the bag. So it is a good amount of pressure as I get that initial dot, that bead of icing out. But as I am pulling away, I'm releasing the pressure on the bag. So it's pressure release, pressure release, pressure release, pressure release, over and over and over again. The consistency here is the same soft peak lettering consistency that I've used on the rest of the set. To be honest, when I started piping this, it wasn't the amount of definition that I had hoped for. I would have preferred to have used a medium peak consistency here, which would have left much more definition in these beads. As you can see, they're melting together just ever so slightly. Once I finished piping this though and got to the painting, I actually kind of liked the look of it melting together. So it survived, the cookie survived. I still like the design. Moral of the story, you can do this technique either with a soft peak or a medium peak. I would typically not suggest using a stiff peak with this because your hand is going to kill 2 minutes in. This is a kind of technique that takes a very long time. So you do not want to be doing a ton of cookies or a large surface like I did with this cookie on a lot of cookies, because this is just going to take forever. But in the name of the cookie, I just had to do it for this. It was the only way. So here I am as I'm approaching that line that I gave myself. I'm just going to make sure that I get close enough. For the next step, I am going to do the tail. I have cut a V into my tipless bag. It's the same kind of cut that you use for leaves. It's pretty big here because I wanted a pretty big tail. And then immediately, I'm not even waiting, I'm going in and I'm going to pipe the top of this tail. I'm actually using the same exact consistency as I did with the beads. It's a very thick flood, you could say. No, it's the same piping consistency as a soft peak. Here's a great example that it does keep its shape if left alone, but it can settle if it's given a little bit of encouragement. And I did this because I wanted to make sure that these small spaces really stayed puffy. Royal icing has a tendency to crater, and especially small spaces like this, you can really see that crater significant. But if you use a thicker icing, it's not going to crater. So I'm using a scribe here just to help the last little bits settle. I do allow this to dry almost completely, and now I'm going into paint with more sterling pearl. This first color is Yummy Berry. Painting a pretty large surface here and realizing as I'm putting this first coat on that I'm definitely going to want to come back and give it a second coat. You'll want to let it dry ever so slightly, if not completely, before you go to that second coat. Otherwise, the second coat won't do anything. Just painting the edges here. I'm leaving that palette on the screen so you can see what it looks like. And here I am. It's been just long enough, so I'm going to go back and do that second coat on the top. To be honest, once this stopped filming, I might have even put a third coat on. Just need to see what it looks like. And then this is the most fun part, where when do you get to intentionally bleed colors? I'm just taking a wet brush and I'm just poking it into crevices wherever I feel like. I want it to bleed. That was the point of this design on this cookie. And then here I am, I'm going to take the mermaid and just finish painting that tail. As you can see, my application here is pretty opaque, so there's a good amount of dust in there, not a lot of Everclear. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm just going in and I'm poking. I wanted to leave just a little bit of white on this tail. That's kind of the theme with all of the cookies that I've done for this set, is they all have a little bit of white left. And this last bit is the golden halos. I just wanted a little bit of gold touch, not a lot. Making sure not to fill up all of the crevices because I wanted that white again. And there we have it, friends. That is the mermaid tail. And that was the entire Mermaid Under the Sea set.